two titans of the game on their way.
So for those of you who are not familiar, Tom Ross is basically the Infect player in Legacy. He is one of the best players in Legacy, and this is his pet deck. On the other side of the table, we have Joe Lossett playing Miracles, and Joe is the Miracles player. We have him, he's one of the most well-known Legacy players, and he's always known for playing this deck. So this is kind of, you know, going to be one of the better representations of how these two decks line up against each other.
So Tom's on the play. He led with a Glistener Elf off of a tropical island. Now Joe mulliganed to 6. It looks like he passed his first turn without playing a land.
Pretty interesting line of play. Now, I think there's two situations that Joe could be in. One is that he has a good hand with one land that's wastelandable, and he's got some Force of Wills and some other stuff, and thinks that he can get away with not playing his land until he has a cantrip or Sensitive Divining Top to cast with it. Or he just has a great hand that has no lands. But either way, it's going to be quite the risk.
Well, it looks like he has 2 Swords to Plowshares and a Force of Will. That's a pretty good hand, even without any lands. However, Tom is just going to go ahead and continue to crack in with this Glistener Elf. He used the Greenstone Zenith last turn to get a Noble Hierarch, which is going to give it a virtual +1, and he is firmly in the driver's seat of this game, although you're in the driver's seat most of the time that your opponent doesn't play any lands.
Yeah, or when you wear a leather jacket, that too.
It's a driver's jacket?
As soon as you put the jacket on, you are in the driver's seat.
Fair enough.
Wherever you sit down, that is the driver's seat.
So Tom is going to go ahead and attack for 2 more Infect. He's going to bring Joe down to 4. He's also going to play out a Blighted Agent and then just pass the turn.
So the fact that Joe kept his hand with 6 cards and no lands, I think really shows that Joe has a lot of respect, not only for Tom's deck, but for Tom as a player, saying, I can't go too far down on cards, and I need to basically get lucky. And the fact that he had a good opening hand despite missing land drops, you know, he felt was on the path to getting lucky. I think it really shows that Joe not only thinks that Tom's a great player, but maybe also that this is going to be a bad matchup for Joe, particularly game 1.
Well, here's the first step. Joe
Step
found
1.
a Flooded Strand.
Yep.
Now looking, it also seems that he has Brainstorm and Terminus in his hand. So if he can live through the next turn, he has a chance to sweep up the board with Terminus. But Tom has that Inkmoth Nexus in the back, and it might come down to that Nexus dealing the last few points of damage.
Yeah, I certainly agree. The Inkmoth Nexus is Tom's big way of keeping himself secure against a sweeper.
It looks like he just found an Invigorate as well. So Tom is going to go ahead and fire up this Inkmoth Nexus. He's probably just going to attack for 4 Infect, which is going to bring Joe to 8, unless he decides to use a Pump Spell. And if I'm Tom, I think I just go for it here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Tom knows that Joe wouldn't have kept his hand unless he had some really good spells. Tom can probably assume that Joe has at least 1 Force of Will, maybe 2. Swords of Plowshares would be a reasonable thing to assume here, but I would basically say, if I was Tom, what is the worst spells that Joe could have, and just assume that he has them.
So it looks like Joe is going to try and use Swords to Plowshares, I assume on an Inkmoth Nexus. Tom is going to respond with an Invigorate on one of the Glistener Elves. Joe is going to force a will back. Tom is going to have another Invigorate for one of the other Glistener Elves. So not only did Joe Lossett mulligan to 6, keep a no-lander, and miss 2 land drops, Tom had a hand with an Infector on turn 1, some more Infectors and a Noble Hierarch, and double Invigorate. Yeah,
I'm going to go home and watch that again, but I'm going to make sure there's no women and children around, because that was just a bloodbath.
An embarrassment of riches. So Tom is going to take game 1 here in this matchup, Infect versus Miracles. Let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboards for the players and see if the matchup happens to favor one way or the other. Joe Lossett has a Wear Tear, he has a copy of Seal of Cleansing, a Cavernous Souls, and is a Staticaster, a Pyroblast, a Red Elemental Blast, 3 Flusterstorm, 2 Rest in Peace, a Pithy Needle, and Enlightened Tutor, a Back to Basics, and a Moat. What do you think Joe's going to do?
So I think Joe has quite a few options here. I think that he could potentially bring in the Seal of Cleansing against Inkmoth Nexus. That was something that I hadn't thought of before, but might be something that that Joe does. I think he's definitely going to be bringing in the Staticaster. That's going to be great in this matchup. He can also bring in the Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast, although I feel it's unlikely. They can hit the Blighted Agent and some of Tom's Permission, but mostly the powerful cards in the matchup from Tom's side are not going to be blue. The other cards that can be brought in are Pithing Needle. That can be a good card against Inkmoth Nexus. And also, this might be a situation where you want to bring in Moat, because if you can play Moat, there's nothing that's going to be able to attack other than Inkmoth Nexus. So you can Moat can effectively blank 2/3 of Tom's Infect creatures.
Seems like a big deal. Let's take a look at what Tom has. He has a Krosan Grip, a Hydroblast, 2 copies of Submerge, a Bajuka Bog, a Flusterstorm, a Seal of Primordium, a Necropede, a Force of Will, a Karakas, a Wasteland, a Viridian Corruptor, a Dismember, a Crop Rotation, a Surgical Extraction, and a Partridge in a Pear Tree. What do you think Tom's going to bring in for this matchup? Well,
first I would bring in the Partridge and the Pear Tree. That would be the first thing I bring in. But I think that he's going to bring in Krosan Grip. That is one of the classic cards to have on your sideboard to fight Miracles. The split second on it is extremely effective. I think that Flusterstorm is something he may look to. It's a good way for Tom to fight a counter war, even though it doesn't counter Jace or Counterbalance, which can be some of the more important cards for Tom to counter. The other card he can bring in is Seal of Primordium, gets an underneath Counterbalance and is able to deal with it. Tom can also look to cards like Force of Will, just so that he has even more disruption or protection, and I think that's going to be about it.
Now, both of these players are known as masters of their craft. Tom for Infect, Joe Lossett for Miracles. Now, if you want to formulate a plan to become a master of your craft, one place you can look for as a resource for that is the StarCityGames.com newsletter. And this is your source for all of your Magic the Gathering news. It's absolutely free. You can sign up there, go.starcitygames.com/newsletter. It's great.
Yeah, I think the newsletter is one of the most efficient ways to keep up to date on everything. You're going to get, some bullet points of what has happened recently. You're going to get some advice on deck lists to play if you have an upcoming FNM or an opening that you're going to. There's the Cardboard Crack comic that's really fun. If you're just looking for something to kind of keep up to date, make sure you don't miss a beat in the metagame, but you don't have a lot of time to comb through a lot of articles on a lot of different websites, this is going to be one of the more time-efficient things that you can do.
And best of all, absolutely for free, go.starcitygames.com/newsletter to find out more. So we've got Joe Lossett on Miracles, Tom Ross on Infect. For those of you just joining us, Tom was able to take game 1 against Joe. However, it didn't look like it was that hard. Joe Lossett mulliganed to 6, kept a no-lander, missed a couple land drops. Tom was able to finish out the game fairly quickly with a very formidable 7-card hand. And now we're going to go into game 2. Joe's back's against the wall. His tournament life is on the line. If he doesn't win here, he's going to be knocked out of the top 8. Although, more than likely, he will still be in the top 32 or top 16. And get a whole bunch of SCG points. Yeah, the points and a little bit of extra cash that you can get at opens is always a nice reward, even if you don't top 8. One thing, just to harken back to the last match that was pretty interesting, was, Joe kept a 6-card hand with no lands. That is a pretty interesting thing to see at such a high level of play. I think a lot of players are so focused on mitigating risk that they will mulligan any hand that has no lands. And I think it's important to highlight that there is a time and a place for a no land hand. You gotta take a risk at some point in the match to win, and if that risk pays off, you could win. And sometimes it doesn't pay off and you lose, and that's just sort of the way it goes. But you don't want to get too focused on mitigating risks that you don't give yourself a chance to have a good draw. So Joe is just going to lead off with an island and a Sensei's Divining Top. Tom is going to have a Tropical Island and a Glistener Elf. It will get caught with the Swords to Plowshares on Joe's second turn. And now Tom is in the middle of a Brainstorm. Definitely the defining card of the format. Both of these players have it in their deck. Both put it to good use. Joe is trying to find pieces to lock his opponent out and control the game, as Tom is trying to find a few pieces just to 1-2 punch wombo combo his opponent with infect damage. Yeah, Tom is the wombo combo man. And I think that generally speaking, he's going to be looking to finish this game quickly, get that wombo combo sooner rather than later. Joe, on the other hand, really wants to just keep pace and focus on killing Tom's infect creatures. If Joe can answer the infect creatures, then Tom's pump spells are pretty useless on their own. Pre-board, Joe doesn't have as many tools, and that may be one of the reasons why he kept a riskier opening hand. But now that we're in the post-board scenario, especially with Joe on the play this game, it's going to be a lot easier for Joe to mount a defense and hold Tom's attacks at bay. No, I do want to talk about Joe's no-land keep a little more.
Sure.
I think that the more I look at the cards that were in his hand, it's pretty reasonable. He had a Force of Will, a blue card, he had a Brainstorm and a Terminus, and 2 Swords to Plowshare. So he has a lot of ways to interact with Tom and further his game plan if he is able to survive. The biggest problem that I have with the keep, though, is it's still fairly weak to Inkmoth Nexus if it takes him a couple turns to get that land.
That is absolutely true, but the key component of that hand for me is the fact that he only needs to draw 1 land to be able to operate. If he can draw 1 land, he's basically going to be able to guarantee casting 1 spell on every turn. A lot of the times you see a no-land hand be pretty devastating in a format like Standard because you need a lot of lands to function. But with that hand that Joe had, he, multiple sorts of Plowshares, Force of Will, and then the Brainstorm to maybe smooth things out, set up a Terminus to catch Joe up if he had fallen behind. I think that is sort of, if you were going to write an article about what kind of hand you would keep with no lands, I think that's basically the exact type of hand you would look to make a solid argument.
So Tom is just going to use a Gitaxian Probe. We're going to see a couple copies of Snapcaster Mage in Joe's hand, along with a Volcanic Island. And Tom has a Ponder. He's going to shuffle it up, and we're going to pass the turn back to Joe. Look at the top 3 with his top on Tom's end step, and then try and get some action going on his turn. It looks like there might be a counterbalance hiding in there.
Yeah, generally speaking, this game's going pretty well for Joe, I would say. Joe, all he wants to do is keep the board clear and hit a bunch of land drops and win later. He doesn't really need to do anything soon. If he can land a counterbalance safely, he'll probably take the opportunity to do so, but that's not particularly important. The important thing is he just keeps Tom's side of the board clear. Tom doesn't have that many threats that matter. In Tom's whole deck, he only has 12 infect creatures, and so if Joe can just target those, the rest of Tom's deck essentially falls apart.
So it looks like Tom did have a copy of Force of Will to stop that counterbalance from hitting the battlefield, and now he has a copy of Inkmoth Nexus. So Tom does have a threat that can win the game on the battlefield. He does have to keep wary of those Snapcaster Mages in Joe Lossett's hand, though, because there is a copy of Swords to Plowshares in his graveyard just waiting to gain flashback.
Yeah, and Tom would much rather use a Force of Will to protect his threats rather than disrupt Joe's way of winning the game. Ideally, Tom would interact as little as possible, because the more interaction he does with Joe, the more likely Tom is going to fall behind, because his cards aren't quite as good on an individual basis, and he doesn't have access to cards like Jace to give a lot of card advantage.
So Tom is just going to use a Gitaxian Probe here, furthering setting up his hand to try and win this game in 1 turn. Looks like he has multiple copies of Invigorate in his hand, so really he's just going to need to connect with his Inkmoth Nexus 1 or 2 times to finish the game. So Tom is going to lay a forest. He's going to fire up this Inkmoth Nexus. Joe's going to declare no blocks. We're going to get the first Invigorate from Tom. I think Joe's probably going to go for a Snapcaster Mage with this Swords to Plowshares. It's all going to depend on if Tom has some way to stop it. Maybe something like a Vines of the Vastwood. This is going to be for 9 infect.
So this is pretty interesting on Tom's part. I mean, this is a no fear sort of play. He's just attacking into Joe. Joe has all of his mana open. Joe could do any number of things. And Tom is basically just saying, again, similar to the hand that Joe kept last game, Tom is just taking a risk and saying,
well, he knows that Joe has those Snapcaster Mages from the Gitaxian Probe.
Oh, wait, yeah, that's right.
So he's basically saying, I got something to stop what you got. Let's see if you're going to pull the trigger.
Wow. And Joe is going to take the damage and plow it post-combat.
And there's the Vines. So had he tried to plow it in combat, then he would have just been stone dead. So
this is a great heads-up play by Joe, and a play that a lot of players are too scared to make, and I applaud Joe for doing it. Is you want to kill the infect creatures post-combat. If you try to kill their infect creature inside of combat, especially once they've probed you and know what you have, you're usually setting yourself up for a disaster.
And so here is going to be a Miracled Entreat the Angels from Joe, and this is going to give him a couple blockers for this Inkmoth Nexus, because Joe Lossett is at 9 poison.
And not only is this going to be multiple blockers, but this is going to be a way for Joe to potentially close out these games. Tom is only at 15 life. These 4/4 angels can be a pretty quick clock.
Well, he is only going to make one angel, though.
Pretty conservative, but I like it. Joe's favored in the long game. He doesn't need to win the game quickly if he doesn't want to. So this is fine.
Yeah, he wants to be able to use his Divining Top, which I can respect, but I don't know how much of a long game this is going to be. He is at 9 infect. All Tom has to do is get through 1 point of damage.
Yeah, Blighted Agent would be pretty phenomenal right now.
So looks like we've got a Gitaxian Probe. Tom's going to be able to see what Joe has in his hand. And there's a copy of Wasteland, which isn't bad here. It's going to be able to cut him off some of his mana.
Yeah, it's not that great, though. Post-board in this matchup, I don't think Joe has that many red cards. And with the basic island, basic plains, he's pretty secure. Killing one of the lands would be a nice play to just keep Joe off from being able to play a card like Jace or Moat. Yeah. Moat would be pretty nice. Not against the Inkmoth Nexus, but against a lot of the other infect creatures that Tom could potentially draw.
Yeah, so at this point, Tom is looking for another Inkmoth Nexus, you know, some type of pump spell to push it through the that 4/4 Angel token, or even something like a crop rotation to find an Inkmoth Nexus would be good. Joe's just going to keep trucking along with this Snapcaster Mage. It's going to attack, bring Tom down to 11. He does still have that Terminus in his hand, but he really can't do much with it at the moment. Looks like Tom is going to go ahead and drop for his turn. It was a green card. Let's see if it impacts the board.
You know, when you're watching an aggro deck and a control deck play against each other, I feel like this is such a common spot where the aggro deck is able to get the control deck all the way down to 1, in this case 9 poison. And then the control deck just barely stabilizes. And then over the course of like 10 or 15 turns, it's finally able to stabilize enough where it can start winning. And, you know, that may be what we're seeing here now.
So Joe is going to go ahead and use a Vendilion Click on Tom's end step. He sees that he has a land and a Glistener Elf. He's going to let him keep those since they don't really do much in the face of what Joe has going on currently. And here's another Snapcaster Mage. I think we're going to see Ponder yet again.
And again, I think Joe just wants to proactively play his stuff. He knows that he doesn't have infinite time if he plays things a little too slowly. But things are definitely starting to swing into his favor. Now he has 2 flying blockers. He's able to attack with a couple creatures, keep a couple back if he wants. And all in all, he's going to be able to threaten lethal probably next turn on Tom Ross.
Looks like Joe found a 5th land and a copy of Jace the Mind Sculptor on that Ponder. So things are going to start to go Joe's way pretty quickly here if he's able to untap and get into his next turn. Looks like he's going to attack with just the Snapcaster Mage and leave back the Vendilion Click and the Angel to block, just in case Tom happens to find something crazy.
So the nice thing about this attack is, given the board state that Tom has access to probably a Dryad Arbor with that Misty Rainforest to block. But if Joe attacks with the 2 flyers, and both the Snapcaster Mages, that would mean that Tom would have to block 2 creatures in order to stay alive. Or excuse me, he would have to block with his Inkmoth Nexus to stay alive, which would really solve the whole problem for Joe.
So Joe is just going to go ahead and use his top there on Tom's end step after he casts Seal of Primordium. And this is going to turn into a Jace the Mind Sculptor, which I imagine will quickly start brainstorming to fill Joe's hand back up while he finishes this game.
So Joe could go for a lethal attack, but there's also a good chance he decides to just play things a little bit more patiently. He is the control deck. He can afford to play things more patiently, and going for a lethal attack may be just more risky than he really needs to do.
Well, I think what I would do here in Joe's spot is I would cast Jason Brainstorm, and if I find another Swords to Plowshares, I just kill Tom.
Yeah.
If you find a plow, you win.
Mm-hmm.
If not, you win next turn.
Yeah.
So let's see what Joe decides to do. It's going to fall to 24 and 9 poison, using that Flooded Strand. We're going into the combat steps, so I think that he's just going to attack with everything.
So if Tom doesn't have a pump spell, this is just a great attack.
So it looks like he's going to block the Angel.
And this will make it so Tom takes 7 damage, meaning that he can still crack his fetch land. I don't know if Tom has any outs from this point, but he's certainly giving himself a chance to draw them. Even if you can't think of any outs, sometimes you just got to buy yourself a draw step anyway to find out if there are any.
So here's the Jace, and he's going to brainstorm, and Tom is just going to concede before the brainstorm even happens. I feel like in that spot, if you're going to brainstorm, that you brainstorm before you attack. As the plow just wins.
Yeah.
And you know all of one card from Tom's hand from the Inkling. It's rough. I mean, I'm not going to question Joe Lossett. He knows how to play Miracles much better than I do.
Yeah, you asked me that question, and I paused to think about it, simply because I don't really like questioning Joe on his Miracles plays. So
fair.
But
you will question him on his StarCraft plays, though. Yeah.
I mean, that's different. It's just a matter of where you spend your time. Joe has spent a lot of time with his Miracles deck, and he is great at it.
Now I'm getting word that both Jerry Thompson and Harlan Fear have won their match.
Wow.
They have gone 13-2.
And they're both on.
Were they X3? How many points? Yeah, they were X3. So they've both gone X3.
With Eldrazi.
With Eldrazi. They had 72 and 71% breakers going into this round.
Pretty nice.
So they're sitting pretty for the top 8. We could have 2 Eldrazi decks in our top 8.
Yeah, it's always a tricky thing with this sort of stuff, because when you have a situation where there's a new breakout deck that all the pros are playing, it can be sometimes hard to separate if they're doing well because of the deck they're playing or just because of who they are. When you're talking about Jerry Thompson, for example, he is just someone who just tears up all the opens he shows up to, no matter what he's playing.
And it also looks like that Andrew Jessup has won.
Wow, nice.
As well. So he is going to be X3. I believe he's on Elves. We haven't seen Elves at all. I think he was the only Elf player that made day 2. I guess there were 2 of them. So he was 50% of the Elf players in the room on day 2.
Yeah, and he is an old school Elves player.
Yeah.
I know when I first started playing the Open Series, and I was telling you how, my first Open I was playing Rug Delver, and I started 07. I remember him playing Elves back then and playing it for quite a while. I think he played it until maybe True Name Nemesis was printed, and then the True Name Nemesis Jete shenanigans kind of pushed Elves out of the format. And we saw a lot of people move away from Elves who are great with it, like Ross Merriam also.
So do you think that either of these players are going to change their sideboarding here, or are they just going to keep their decks the same?
I don't think so. Whether on the play or the draw, the matchup is still clearly based on Tom seizing the initiative of the early game or Joe holding him at bay and grinding him out later on. So the roles don't really change depending on the player or the draw, and so I don't think the configuration of the deck will either.
So our players are going to go ahead and finish up sideboarding here. We saw their player profiles last round, so we're not going to talk about that. But I do want to talk about the StarCityGames.com YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah.
This is very, very sweet. YouTube.com/StarCityGames. Versus Series, Premium Series archives, SCG Tour archives, unboxings, and more. In fact, I even have some unboxing videos on the YouTube channel.
Oh, nice. I got to watch those.
Solo myself and with my good friend Brian Brunduin. You can check those out where we did some unboxings. I in particular did the Modern Event deck, and I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, it's absolutely free to like and subscribe to the channel. You get notified when new things get posted. Again, absolutely free. YouTube.com/StarCityGames. A bunch of sweet videos. If you happen to have some free time, driving somewhere, if you work in, say, like a pottery studio, and you're not
like
talking
me.
to anybody, you can put on some videos. And
way better than the radio. That's actually how I have absorbed a lot of my skill set and knowledge of the format, is simply by listening to all the tournaments while I'm working. I work pretty hard with my decks, but I probably don't get quite as much testing done as some other players. I'm not a really big moto grinder, and so I have really used all the video content that's online to really hone my skills personally. So for those of you joining us, we're going into Game 3. Tom Ross is on Infect. Joe Lossett is on Miracles. Obviously, I'm sure you knew that as you were tuning in. Tied up 1-1, going to Game 3. Both players are 11-3.
Whoever wins this match has a good shot at top 8 in the event. Whoever doesn't win the match is still going to go home with a bundle of SCG points. Tom's on the play. He's going to lead off with a Tropical Island and a Noble Hierarch. Joe Lossett has an Island and a Ponder, and it looks like he's going to keep, maybe. There's a Terminus there. Yeah,
it looks like he's got a Terminus, a couple of cards down. So pretty smart to put it third card down. Where the positioning is specifically is pretty interesting. He doesn't have an island, so if he had left it as a second card, he wouldn't be able to Terminus on the following turn, and so he's going to be looking to draw the second card down, play a white source this turn, and next turn be able to Terminus.
Well, it looks like the card that he draws for the turn is a Divining Top, so if he has a white source, he can play his top, and he can even Terminus on Tom's turn if he tries to kill him.
Yeah, indeed.
But he is just going to pass the turn back to Tom. Tom does have a Noble Hierarch and a Blighted Agent on the battlefield. And here's where things start to get interesting, because Joe Lossett could just die.
Yeah, so Joe has to worry about a lot of things in this scenario. As soon as Tom's pressure is most effective early in the game, particularly because Tom has cards like Daze. And Joe wants to be a little careful about how he uses his mana.
So Tom is just going to attack for 2 Infect, pass the turn back to Joe, who's going to try and Miracle this Terminus in his draw step. I know Tom has a couple copies of Force of Will in his hand, so let's see if it resolves.
I would like to see Tom Force of Will this, but it depends on what else is in his hand and how he wants to go about doing things. But generally speaking, the Infect creatures in the deck are few and far between. And as soon as you get one to stick on the board, you really want to keep it there because, as we saw in the previous game, Tom had his first creature get Swords of Plowshares, and then he was kind of spinning his wheels for a couple turns looking for another Infect creature.
Looks like Tom is going to Force of Will, going to 19, pitching Daze to get rid of that Terminus. Joe Lossett is going to play an island for his turn, and he might even just be able to land a counterbalance here and see if he can ride that to victory.
And this is a situation where the fact that Joe has a bunch of basics is a bit of a problem. It would be really nice if one of those islands was a Tundra so that he could hold his Swords to Plowshares up, but in this particular case, he's not really able to bluff anything, even whether he has it or not.
It looks like the artifact that I saw in Joe's hand was a Pithing Needle, not a Divining Top, but it's still going to be pretty sweet here. He can use it. Tom has to proactively use those Verdant Catacombs so he doesn't get double Stone Rained by the Pithing Needle, and then Joe is free to name something like Inkmoth Nexus proactively.
Yeah, I have to imagine that Tom's probably going to crack one of them, but not really worry about the other. If Joe really wants to name Verdant Catacombs and Stone Rain Tom once, Tom's probably fine with that.
Yeah.
So this is basically going how Tom wants it to go. He's got some pressure, and he's able to keep it on the board.
So it looks like Joe did name Verdant Catacombs to lock out that other land.
This is quite the star-studded match. I mean, whoever wins this is going to top 8, and each of these players have a ton of top 8s already. I would love to see, and each of them has to be one of the favorites to win the whole thing if they do top 8.
We got to remember, Jerry Thompson is in the top 8 of this tournament.
I feel like Jerry Thompson doesn't, in the window of time since Jerry Thompson has become active again, I mean, Jerry Thompson's Jerry Thompson. I don't want to take anything away from him. But I think Tom Ross and Joe may have more top 8s than Jerry. I'm not sure.
They might.
Yeah, I don't know.
He has a whole bunch from back before he went off to Wizards, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just talking about, past year.
All right, so Tom has a Brainstorm. So I guess that Pithing Needle is doing something. It's going to stop him from being able to shuffle away these cards with that Brainstorm.
Yeah.
But since Joe doesn't have access to white mana, he could still just die at any point.
Yeah, Joe would have really liked to have had a Tundra. This is a matchup where Joe's life total or mana base doesn't get pressured in the same way that it does against when he's playing against a lot of the Delver matchups, but he can run into accessibility issues, meaning that he has some colors of mana but not all, but looks like he makes it through that turn okay. So
yeah, Tom is going to resolve his Brainstorm. He just has another copy of Noble Hierarch. He's going to crash in for 3, bringing Joe Lossett up to 5 poison and passing the turn back. Looks like we have a hand. There's a couple Swords to Plowshares. He's got a Cavernous Souls. He also has a Counterbalance, but that Plow is going to take care of the Blighted Agent for Tom. And now Tom might have to be on the normal damage route.
Yeah, it seems like maybe Tom is flooding out a little bit. Either that or he just has another infect creature to deploy. So I'm not really sure. Either way, that was a big move for Joe Lossett. To be able to just Swords to Plowshares that creature and keep the board clear is a big step towards Joe stabilizing this game.
Now that Cavern has named Wizard, so he's going to be able to Vendée click and have it, not be countered by Joe or by Tom, which is pretty important considering he does have a Force of Will on his hand. Ooh, and he does have another copy of Blighted Agent, so Joe just might be able to take it here with that Vendée click. So
I wonder if that was the draw for this turn. I kind of think that if Tom had those 2 blue cards in his hand previously when the Swords of Plowshare was cast, Tom probably would have discarded the Blighted Agent to keep it on the board rather than have to recast it on the following turn and miss out on 3 damage.
Yeah, I think that the Blighted Agent was the draw for this turn.
Yeah.
So let's see what Joe decides to do. If he wants to let Tom keep it, he is going to let him keep it. And I think he's going to try and bank on that Swords to Plowshares in his hand to take care of it.
And Tom almost has enough mana to hardcast the Force of Will, except for that Verdant Catacombs can't be cracked. So the Pithing Needle on the Verdant Catacombs, surprisingly, is doing a little bit of work here. I know it's not the reason that, or the expected use for Pithing Needle when Joe Lossett boarded it in, but it's, having some unusual usefulness here.
You got to use them where you can.
Yeah.
So Tom is just going to crash in for 2 with his Noble Hierarch, knocking Joe down to 17. He's going to cast that Blighted Agent. Looks like Joe has picked up a Flooded Strand, so he has access to a second white mana source here. But I think we're just going to see a Swords to Plowshares on that Blighted Agent. Tom is going to go up to 20. And now we're going to have this battle where Joe needs to try and finish this game out before Tom is able to cobble something back together and win the game.
And even though they're stacked on top of each other, Pithing Needle and Counterbalance isn't the same as Sensei's Divining Top and Counterbalance.
It is not. So Tom is just going to crash in for 3 with that Vendée click. He's going to knock Tom down to 17. And let's see what we can find here. This might be a game where Tom ends up trying to win with normal damage.
It could be. It wouldn't be the first time, and I'm sure it wouldn't be the last time, but he's got Joe with 5 infect damage, so I don't know. If he was going to win with normal damage, I almost wonder if he would have gotten Dryad Arbor there from that fetch land.
That's true.
So maybe that's not his plan. 17 damage is quite a bit.
Yeah. You're only a Become Immense away, though.
It's true. I wonder if Tom still has Crop Rotation in his deck post-board. That can be effectively extra Inkmoth Nexuses, which are some of Tom's best threats against the sweepers that Joe has access to. But it is card disadvantage, which is a problem.
So Tom is going to attack for 2 with his Noble Hierarch, knock Joe down to 15. It looks like he picked up a copy of Vines of Vastwood. So that's +4. We're getting close.
Yeah, we are getting close.
Looks like Joe has a Flusterstorm in his hand.
Yeah.
So he will be able to use that to good effect if and when Tom decides to start trying to pump his creatures.
Yeah, it depends, though. Tom is kind of flooding out and has a lot of mana.
Well, we're going to see no attack from Joe as he is flooding out as well. Just going to pass back and maybe try and trade that Vendée click off for one of these Noble Hierarchs.
And now Tom's at the point where he can hard cast his Force of Will, which is, pretty impressive.
Well, there's another counterbalance. It's not really going to do much. But we might see Tom here fetch with his Dryad Arbor. Fetched for a... nope, maybe he boarded it out. Well, there's a Spell Pierce. All right, Joe Lossett, you got 15 turns, buddy.
Yeah.
Attack you with my Noble Hierarch, put you at 14.
This is a situation where neither deck is really functioning the way it wants to. I have to imagine it still favors Joe just because the game is drawing out. I mean, if he draws something like a Jace, it swings into Joe's favor real fast.
Well, Joe is just going to play a land and pass, and Tom just picked up a copy of Blighted Agent. So
that's good.
So he's going to cast this Blighted Agent, and we're going to see if Joe Lossett, the Miracle Man, is going to be able to blind flip a 2 to counter this Blighted Agent.
It would be a miracle. He doesn't have that many 2s. I mean, he's got some Snapcaster Mages. He's got a few more counterbalances, but I think that's it.
All right, let's see what happens. Oh, well.
Maybe I'll just leave that there.
Yeah.
He could crack his fetch land before the next counterbalance trigger to try to find it, but seeing that terminus, I don't think there's a need.
Now, Tom does have Force of Will and Spell Pierce in his hand, so he can use the Force of Will to counter it, and he didn't attack with his Noble Hierarch here so that he could pay for this Flusterstorm. How good of a play is that?
Tom Ross, ladies and gentlemen.
Jeez.
The boss just doing everything right.
Man.
Pretty unbelievable.
How easy is it just to be on autopilot and attack with the Noble Hierarch there, and then you get blown out by this Flusterstorm?
I feel like at some point someone should take a compilation of Tom Ross videos. You know, go through all the Star City archives on Twitch and just have all the matches that Tom Ross has played and just, you know, put them on a YouTube list or something so you can just watch them all in a row. Because every single match, he just does things so perfectly.
So good.
And Joe's just got...
There's a top on top of his deck, so he's like, well, maybe I can shuffle it away and try and find a 5.
Yeah.
But that top might be my route to winning this game. It might help me find another terminus.
Yeah, on the other hand, though, Tom may just kill him next turn. I mean, he's got quite a few, like, any of his pump spells will kill Joe if they resolve, right? I mean, there's Vines of the Vastwood, there's Become Immense,
well,
there's Invigorate.
Vines would be countered.
Well, I'm talking about next turn.
Yeah. Well, let's see what Tom's got. All right, well, he's going to attack for 2. He's going to put Joe Lossett to 7 poison.
And Joe still has that Flusterstorm, but it's probably going to be ineffective in this late game scenario where Tom has so much mana available.
Now here's the top.
So the best thing that the top can probably do is find another terminus. And given the fact that there's 2 fetch lands on the board, Joe is going to be able, to do some digging because he can activate the top, look at the top 3. If he doesn't see what he likes, he can shuffle and then activate top, look at the new top 3. And he's going to be able to do that twice.
Yep, so he's going to fetch here, go down to 13. I mean, even a Snapcaster Mage to rebuy one of these Sword to Plowshares would be fine too.
Yeah, I have to imagine that the odds of Joe finding something are pretty good right here, but he does need to find something. There's a lot of top decks that Tom could have that would end the game.
Right, so here's the first shuffle. Let's see what we got. Counterbalance, Plains, Wear Tear.
That's not it.
Yeah, those don't do anything.
Oh man, Joe's getting pretty unlucky here. First the 6-card hand that didn't have any lands, and now this.
Yeah, I think we go shuffling again.
So, you know, when you are playing the aggressor, you force them to have the answers. Sometimes the odds are not in your favor, but it's still up to them to find what they need.
Yep.
And this is, you know, pretty unbelievable display of how. One of the reasons I like to be the aggressor in a lot of situations.
Ooh, there's the Volcanic Island. If you brought in any of those Pyroblast or Red Blast, that's even another out to get rid of this Blighted Agent.
That is true. I don't think he brought those in, though. But that would be a pretty cool way to do this, to find the most narrow answer he has available to take it down.
There's a Snapcaster Mage, but he doesn't have the mana to be able to use it yet. Oh, he can still play a land for the turn. So there's an answer to the Blighted Agent. However, it would leave him tapped out, and Tom Ross could use the Spell Pierce that's in his hand to counter this Sword to Plowshare. So if Tom draws a pump spell here, he just wins. He's going to pass back to Tom.
Dude, the leather jacket is just too strong. You can't beat the leather jacket.
All right, so he's going to give him another turn. Going to put him down to 9.
Oh, man.
Up to 9.
What a decider for a top 8 invite.
So we're going to get one more, what we think might be one more top for Joe. He's going to draw this Snapcaster Mage.
And the patience on Joe's part is pretty amazing here. I mean, he's willing again to go all the way up to 9 poison, just so long as he gives himself an opportunity to play around. Yeah, again, to play around the soft permission.
So here's the Snapcaster Mage. Tom also has a Flusterstorm.
So I don't know if Joe is a religious guy or not, but I have to imagine he was just saying a prayer during that last turn, hoping that this resolved.
All right, so Snap is going to target Swords to Plowshares, I think, if it resolves.
And Tom's probably waving his arms in the air saying, don't you see my leather jacket? You can't do this to me. Man, so one of the things that I love about this matchup is how dramatic it is from start to finish. The Infect deck, it's always on the verge of killing its opponent. There's so many, with the nature of pump spells and the unblockable creatures, Tom can just do so much damage out of nowhere. Any random top deck can frequently win him the game. And Joe, on the other hand, is usually just barely threading a needle to stay alive. A lot of the times he doesn't have exactly what he needs and has to sequence things out through multiple turns, not able to cast his removal spell now because he's worried about Spell Pierce, so he has to do it next turn. And the sequencing and the drama that gets built up between these games is pretty amazing.
So what's real neat here is that we might end up seeing a Flusterstorm on a Flusterstorm. And is that a Vines of Vastwood? It is.
Wow.
So he could have just went for a kill last turn.
Pretty good top deck from Tom.
So there's a Vines. And now Tom's going to have a Flusterstorm for Joe's Flusterstorm, plus the Spell Pierce that's still in his hand. Oh no, he pitched the Spell Pierce to the Force of Will. Man, this is... Oh.
I'm going to need a little bit of a breather before this top 8 starts. My heartstrings are getting pulled in every direction.
So we've got 3 spells have been cast here. Oh, he's going to top. Force of Will. Oh, is he going to draw the Force of Will and try and counter it that way? Oh, man. This slow roll on the Vines of Vastwood.
Yeah.
Wow. What patience by Tom.
Yeah, not making a move until he absolutely has to. And I like that on Tom's part. A lot of the times in the early part of the game, Tom wants to jam stuff, but in this late game scenario where there's counterbalances, there's tops, it's a bit more reasonable for Tom to try to be a little bit more patient because it's so much more likely that Joe has something that Tom needs to play around.
Ooh, so Tom is thinking about responding.
So Tom still has a Flusterstorm in his hand?
He is, but he's thinking about responding to while this top trigger is on the stack. Okay. So he made him pay 1 more mana for the plow.
And now he's doing this just to basically build up more storm triggers. And because the top is already tapped, Joe can't put it on top of his library. He's going to have some mana to rearrange the top 3 cards of his library, but because the top is tapped and the trigger to put it on top of the library is on the stack, it's not going to be able to do anything against this Flusterstorm. So
Joe has a Flusterstorm in his hand.
Oh, Joe has a Flusterstorm. There's Flusterstorms on top of Flusterstorms is what you're saying?
Yeah, this is... I feel like if Tom would have just let him draw his card, then he pitches the Flusterstorm to the Force of Will to try and counter the Vines of Vastwood, and then the Flusterstorm gets to come in and clean everything up.
Yeah, Tom's you might be right.
Oh, so what happens now?
Well,
we've got triggers and targets. So we've got Snapcaster Mage, Swords to Plowshares, Vines of Vastwood, Daze, Flusterstorm. So Tom's Flusterstorm is for 5. Joe's Flusterstorm is for 6.
So it's going to be, I have to imagine that
I think that all 5 of Tom's copies of Flusterstorm are targeting the Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah, I believe that. So for Joe's side, it gets a little bit more complicated because he can't really have them all target the Vines of the Vastwood because that's already going to be potentially countered. And so he wants to be countering the Flusterstorm triggers, I believe, from Tom.
Tom does have 2 mana available to him, though.
Yeah, so I don't think that this is going to work out for Joe.
Yeah, I think that because Tom has 1 additional mana, this is going to end up in Tom's favor. We need to work on a user interface for this stream.
So I think Tom is just going to pay for Joe's Flusterstorm enough so that some of his triggers get pushed through. The one thing that gets a little weird is Joe has 1 mana available, but I believe Tom can just pay for 2 different Flusterstorm triggers so that Joe is going to have to pay 2 mana and only has access to 1. I think that's how it is, but when you have Flusterstorms countering Flusterstorms and a bunch of spells on the stack, things get a little tricky, so we'll have to see exactly how the players work this out.
Tom's were all on swords and Joe's were on Tom's Flusterstorm. So it looks like all of Tom's Flusterstorms are on Swords to Plowshares. All of Joe's Lossetts are on Tom's Flusterstorms, except 1 copy has 2. So,
right. So
once
now,
everything's said and done, Joe is going to need to pay 2 mana for his Swords to Plowshares, which he doesn't have available because Tom used his days while this Divining Top drawing trigger is on the stack. Now, how gross would this be if the top card... oh no, this is on Joe's turn, so it's not like a Terminus would have done anything.
Right.
Man, Tom Ross is real good at Magic.
Tom Ross is really good, just doing everything right. The leather jacket continues to be fireproof, indestructible, just keeping Tom, safe and secure through so many matches. And, him and his blue steel gaze is just slicing through the competition.
Tom had all this figured out real quick.
Yeah, Tom knew exactly what he needed to do. And so that was all on Joe's turn.
Yeah.
So now Tom can just untap and attack.
Oh, and he did the Flusterstorm with the top on the stack.
Right.
So that he wouldn't be able to use Counterbalance to counter one of the Flusterstorm.
Exactly,
copies.
yeah.
Man.
And Tom comes in, attacks with his Bladed
Wow.
Agent. It is unblockable.
Wow.
And Tom, the boss, Ross, just takes it down, locks up another top 8, has to be a favorite for the whole tournament, takes down one of the best legacy players we have on the Open Series to get there. And really, I mean...
What a game.